For providing us some great input today. I'm just going to end with a couple of questions that dig a little deeper into the outbound side. We've talked a lot about inbound. It's very important, and I appreciate the focus that all four of you have had on that issue. I do think we have to have a level playing field, and as difficult as it is to find sometime, I think we've gotten some good ideas here today. We all want this FDI to be here in the United States because foreign investment creates jobs, but at the same time, we don't want to be disadvantaging U.S. companies, particularly if we're putting in place round-tripping rules and other things on the outbound side. The one thing I'll say about intangible income leaving our country, which is more mobile, and that, to me, is the primary problem, is that Mr. Greenberg just mentioned patent boxes. Increasingly, our competitive countries in the OECD are saying it's fine if you want to take advantage of our patent box, but you've also got to move your R&D. So to Mr. Shea's point, absolutely I agree we need a more competitive economy and a knowledge economy and trained employees who can handle it. But ultimately, if a company wants to take advantage of the lower rates from a patent box and they're told you can take advantage of it only if you include R&D work in that country, Ireland is an example, there's an incentive to move out of Boston or, in your Gillette case, Cincinnati. So I do think that has to be part of our focus here. I guess I would just ask you, on the outbound side, the balancing act is to prevent that base erosion, particularly intangible income, going to a low-tax jurisdiction, but not making U.S. multinationals uncompetitive. So how do we strike that balance? Mr. Wells talked about 367D and how Treasury could do more with existing law. What do you all think about his idea, and what else can we do on the outbound side, particularly with regard to intangible income? I'll start right in the middle with Mr. Shea, and then we'll move out right and left.
The patent boxes that I've examined, and I've examined quite a few, they're very difficult to design. They're very difficult to limit. They end up being essentially rate reduction. So let's be clear that generally they're very poor so far. And I'm not sure we've seen much effect of anything other than changing titles to patents. With respect to how do we achieve the balance of competitive versus uncompetitive, I think today we've had a suggestion of an array, but I think it does come down to we can't just look at source taxation. We can't just look at outbound taxation. We need to have both be robust and protect U.S. interests. And U.S. interests are a level playing field in the United States and discouraging the kind of massive income shifting that Dr. Clausen's research has described. And I think if you go in the direction of a territorial, if you do not have a robust minimum tax, then you're going to have an issue. The European Union minimum tax is only 5 people and a dog for within the EU. They have a different standard with respect to non-EU countries. So we should really be, again, this comes down to details, and we need to be very careful in how we do it.
Mr. Greenberg.
So the most important thing we can do is lower the rate. Lower the rate as sharply as possible. That's the bottom line.
Lowering the rate helps, because if you have a 20% rate, you handle a lot of the potential tax avoidance problems. But still, there are jurisdictions well below that, some with as low as 0, others in the 10 to 15 range.
The other thing that I would hope we do is make it relatively easy in a transition to repatriate IP back into the United States, so that if you want to locate it here, you can pretty easily. And then you want appropriate, strong R&D incentives to do work in the United States. And then, frankly, if the U.S. moves to a system that looks more like the rest of the world, then instead of the BEPS process harming us, it can begin to provide us some support, because it's getting harder to move IP, as you pointed out, to 0-rate jurisdictions where you don't do anything. And if there's an inbound tax, well, suddenly, even if you go to the 0-rate jurisdiction, you're not going to pay nothing coming into the United States. So, that's less of an attraction. You're not round-tripping. And you're not round-tripping successfully. Mm-hmm. The same thing applies equally for foreign-based multinationals. So you're not concerned that you can't do it, but your foreign competitors can, which is a big problem under current law that round-trippers rightly complain about. And so I think that you end up in a better place if you just lower the rate as much as you can, create strong R&D incentives, let people bring intellectual property back. That's my instinct.
Mr.
Don't
Wells.
create substance rules to force people to take jobs out.
Mr. Wells.
Okay, I think I agree with, maybe all of us agree, lowering the rate is a wonderful idea that will help. I think that if you move to a territorial regime, which I think you should and you must, then what we're saying is that Subpart F should not serve as an important backstop, or it should not be expanded as the base protection measure. As today's hearing has said, many times we say we worry about earnings stripping. Well, the answer to that is to apply a tax on only U.S. companies under Subpart F. And what I hope has come out of this hearing is that no, Subpart F is not the answer to base erosion. And if we do go toward a territorial regime, and we don't make a robust Subpart F regime with it, then we really do need source taxation. We have to get busy about how do we protect the U.S. tax base from interest stripping, royalty stripping, and related parties payments generally. And I think if we do that, then I think that you can come up with a system that will be a level playing field. And again, I would just caution with this comment. Every time we seem to talk about protecting what is the rate of tax in the U.S., to the extent an inbound company can get a tax advantage, that puts them at a competitive advantage versus U.S. companies. And we need a system that levels that playing field for competitiveness reasons.
Dr. Klausing, and I'm going to ask you to at least base part of your answer on the possibility of a territorial system, because I think that's what we're talking about in general here. And not that I'm not interested in your other comments, but if you could think about it, if there were a territorial system, how would it work?
Absolutely. The first thing I would note is that lowering the tax rate is definitely not enough, and it's not going to get you there. If you look at the actual data on the profit shifting problem, over 80% of the profit shifting for U.S. multinational firms is destined to 7 havens, and those havens have effective tax rates that are typically 2, 3, sometimes less in percentage terms. So simply slashing the rate isn't going to handle that base erosion protection. So assuming you go with a territorial system, I think the key is to do tough base erosion protection measures, including a per-country minimum tax, which I think would be one of the more effective measures you could take. This should be coupled with off-the-shelf remedies to deal with the inversion problem, like a 50% ownership threshold, exit tax, earnings stripping limits, and the like. You can also address check-the-box regulations and work with some of our trading partners on the BEPS steps. Some of these steps are Band-Aids, but they're better than nothing at all. And focusing on the fundamentals of the economy, I think, is also a really important thing that I would come back to. Paying for your tax cuts, funding education, funding infrastructure.
Great. Well, listen, thank you all. I could stay here all morning and afternoon, but I'm afraid you probably have better things to do. We haven't even gotten into deemed repatriation and whether it should be bifurcated or not. Any thoughts on that are helpful, not today, but presenting those to the committee and the staff. Whether there should be differences as the camp draft had with regard to Subpart F is important. So thank you for what you've done. I'll just end by saying 2 things. One, there is an urgency here, and I know that people are saying we need more time, more time. We have spent, I think Mr. Greenberg said 6 years, it seems more like 20 years talking about this, and there have been dozens of hearings, broadly speaking, on tax reform. This is not something that hasn't had a lot of debate. Not to say we shouldn't have more, I'm all for it, and I'm really happy we're in the committee process here because we need to have public debate. Infrastructure or healthcare and was not subject to that, and that was a mistake in my view. I hope that infrastructure will have that kind of debate as an example. And then finally, just to say, I think we need to be very careful when we talk about this notion that somehow this is tax cuts that will pay for themselves. That's not what Secretary Mnuchin said over the weekend. I saw his comments. What he said was there will be economic growth that will accompany good tax reform, the right kind of tax reform, which includes the business side, because our code is so out of date right now. There's an enormous opportunity to repatriate profits, but also to just allow American companies to be competitive and add more jobs here, and that will raise economic growth. And if you increase growth, I think it's about 0.4% over what the projections would otherwise be. I think that accounts for about the $1.5 trillion that's talked about. So it's not that tax cuts pay for themselves, it's that the right kinds of tax relief, and more importantly for me, reform, will lead to better economic growth, and we should take that into account. That's my view anyway.